discussion after lunch is the most challenging for any conference. But here, basically, this is why the organizers has put some of the most interesting speakers, not necessarily the moderator, on this. And we're going to discuss an issue which everybody who remembers the beginning of the enlargement process is going to remember how important it was. I do believe it was 20 years ago when Adam Michnik famously said that the worst about communism is what comes after. And of course, this was very much about the rise of nationalism, the idea of the post-communist nationalism, which was very much embodied in the Yugoslav wars. And then the story was where basically the problem of the nationalism goes with respect to the European Union. And here you have two different schools of thoughts. Let's put it like this now. One basically claims that the European enlargement for the last 10 years was the major argument and the major factor for decreasing nationalism in Central and Eastern Europe, and basically it was through diffusion of values. This was also through the opening of the borders. You have the institutional norms. You know the argument. But there is another argument which was now very much also supported by the rise of some nationalistic parties and discourses in Central and Eastern Europe, basically claiming the opposite. That strangely enough, the European integration basically became the new ground on which the nationalistic discourse is built. That unlike the traditional nationalism of the 19th century, it's very much about attacking the European Union. And secondly, and not unimportantly, the fact that all these countries are within the European Union makes some of the voters and the politicians much easier to play with the nationalistic discourse because they're less afraid about the consequences. And we have a really, really interesting panel of people to discuss these problematics. We are going to speak basically on the order the people are sitting here. This is not from the left to the right. This is simply how they're put. And I do believe that they're very interesting in many different reasons. All of them are very interesting in his or her own, but also because they come from different experiences, and also professionally, they come from different type of fields of study and research when it comes to nationalism. Alina Mungiu-Pipidi, who is a professor in the Hertie School of Government, she has been doing especially the populism and nationalistic populism starting already with the late 1990s based on a lot of surveys and empirical data comparing Romania and Serbia, basically. So this is not a problem which she has discovered lately. And also she has been doing quite a lot of probably nobody these days has been doing so much work and also empirically work on corruption and anti-corruption. And I do believe this is quite important because nationalism and anti-corruption discourse are extremely important for the identity and the support of some of these parties, so I can imagine basically her also having something to say about this. Lajos Bokros basically, I also do believe, has a very diverse and rich experience with nationalism. But this is the perspective of the economist. He was a minister, member of European Parliament, professor in the CEU. So he has the policymaker's perspective, the academic perspective, but also he's living in one of the countries which are now very paradigmatic for our right or wrong discourse about nationalism. So being Hungarians these days is an advantage on its own when you discuss the issue.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And Solly Özel and basically Turkey, and especially post-Kemalist Turkey, and where the nationalist discourse goes there, how we are going to define it, it's very interesting because it's outside of the European Union. On the other side, all these dynamics of the EU relations with Turkey and to what extent the new Turkish nationalism basically is defined in its relations with the EU is also something that I find extremely important. And Solly, who is professor in Kadir University and probably, at least in my view, the most prominent and interesting also foreign policy analyst in Turkey, is somebody who really deserves to be listened to. And to this audience, I'm probably not the one to introduce Anton Pelinka, because you know him much better than me. But you know also his work on the topic for the last 2 decades. So it's simply my pleasure to give the floor to Alina.